O Lord of hosts, be with us, for we have none other help in times of adversity but Thee. O Lord of hosts, have mercy on us.
All right, what's up, everybody? We have our good buddy David Patrick Harry from Church of Eternal Logos. He's joining us today to cover a topic that I first saw maybe a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. I was listening to a link that somebody sent me from a weird Lutheran guy. And if you remember, the Lutheran guy was talking like this. And he was talking about how he had just engaged in deconstructing his faith journey. And through this deconstruction process, he learned a lot about the oppression that he found in Christianity. Since that time, this has become a trend where we're noticing all over, mainly TikTok. I mean, it's kind of spilling out into other areas. And one of the key characters that has helped promote this, we'll talk about Dan McClellan as one of these characters, or is that his name? Dan?
Yeah,
Dan McClellan, yeah. And COTEL just sent me his Instagram. As you can see, it's basically all him and a bunch of Marvel soy gear. So this is going to tell you right. This is going to tell you right away, like the sort of personalities that we're dealing with. But also one of the big YouTubers, if you know Rhett from Rhett and Link, is one of the big YouTubers and now TikTokers who's promoted this trend of, quote, deconstructing my Christianity. So today we're going to cover that, and this is an introductory stream. We're going to actually deal with the more in-depth theological challenges in the second stream, which will be over on COTEL's channel. I've got him linked in the show description and in the title, so be sure and follow David Patrick Harry over at his channel, and we'll do that part two probably next week. But today we're going to introduce the topic, and again, it seems to right now be sort of confined to the evangelical world. It's apparently spilling over into Mormonism with this McClellan guy. It's a lot of emergent church, non-denominational people doing this. And so what's your initial assessment of this? When did you first hear about deconstructing my Christianity? And what's your initial assessment, David?
So I had heard about it like you probably about a year ago, but I never dove down the rabbit hole at TikTok, deconstructing my Christianity until this stream we started talking about this topic. Shout out to AC. And once I dove down that rabbit hole, I was kind of surprised by how many views they get. I mean, there are multiple videos that have millions of views on TikTok where they really bring the most basic criticisms of Christianity and act as if they have uncovered these hidden jewels and secrets that nobody's heard about. Theodicy is a big one, trying to explain the existence of evil, and if God's omnipresent and omniperfect, well, then how come people die? And they mock Christianity by saying, if God, why bad thing? And then they go on to talk about why it's a good argument. And it's like, no, it's not. But it's kind of a pseudo-intellectual social media trend where these criticisms are incredibly superficial and have been dealt with, I mean, for at this point, 2,000 years. And I was kind of surprised to see how it is very, very popular right now, especially like you said on TikTok amongst the Gen Z. So, they try to utilize deconstructionism and they really don't even know what it is. I mean, I would say maybe the McClellan guy is familiar because he is academically trained. He has a PhD, master's degrees in biblical studies and stuff like that. But, deconstructionism as a general philosophical methodology begins with Derrida and his grammatology. And when we talk about postmodern, Jordan Peterson's postmodernism, it has to do with the linguistic turn in philosophy in which they do away with the authority of the author itself. And therefore you move into infinite interpretations. And so it's ironic that they're using deconstructionism to highlight how biblical readings of scripture are inaccurate. Meanwhile, their own methodology has been criticized throughout scholarship as being relativistic and really it's deconstructing, but it never constructs anything. It's just constant criticism. And they themselves are guilty of relativism and subjective interpretations of reading. So what's the ultimate conclusion and point?
Yeah, this is a great point, and this is a very common presuppositional critique that I've done over the years. I got this from Bonson. When you encounter somebody who is a deconstructionist, of course, they always assume that they read Derrida and they derived Derrida's meanings from his text. but wait a minute, I thought I can't know authorial intent, and I thought I have to deconstruct all of my narratives, my grand narratives. So it's a very contradictory, philosophical nonsense position from the outset. But I'll briefly read a little bit here just to give an introduction to the topic. Faith deconstruction is an evangelical movement within particularly American evangelicalism. And it's closely related to what's called the ex-evangelical movement, and this is a very adjacent to Reddit's, the soy atheist sphere of Reddit, of course. It can have a range of meanings. Alyssa Childers, so here we have it's beginning with a woman, defines deconstruction as a process of systematically dissecting and rejecting the beliefs that you grew up with. Now, people are finding this to be some groundbreaking thing, but it's like, I mean, pretty much everybody who becomes a teenager at some point, I know I did, I'm sure you, everybody questions their belief. Why is this some new phenomenon of when I first questioned my Christianity, it's like I realized this is a system of oppression, as if no one ever questioned their faith when they become 17-year-olds or whatever, right? So from the outset it's kind of silly, and like you said, in my notes I put this is a pseudo movement. This is it's a bunch of pseuds. It goes on to say that Tyler Huckabee, who wrote for Relevant magazine, and you have to keep in mind a lot of these emergent church movements, a lot of these non-denominational strip mall churches, a lot of these are tied to NGOs, they're tied to foundations that fund them to push these kinds of ideas, particularly who was one of the founders of, or early on, if I remember, he's one of the early emergent church people, and this was an idea to kind of pick and choose from everything from Catholicism to evangelicalism to classical Reformation theology to kind of create your own evangelical church movement called the Emergent Church back in the 2000s, and this kind of was it played a role in a lot of the mega churches that popped off during that time period. But it goes on to say that it's a process of re-examining your faith. John Stonestreet, Timothy Paget note that it is both used descriptively, covering everybody from Kevin Max to Derek Webb to Rob Bell, or the prescriptive recommendation that you question. The term, as David noted, derives loosely from Jacques Derrida's philosophical concept of deconstruction, and the idea is that eventually you learn to erode the structures that you were raised with, because you figure out, I don't know St. Paul's intention. I don't know the basis for why the church fathers made this the Bible. So I don't know. So why do I believe any of this? It's just because I was raised with it. But
I wrote down in regard to some of the philosophical roots of deconstructionism is that it kind of is a blending of really three important thinkers. One is Saussure's linguistics, which, for those who aren't familiar, the whole claim to fame there is that he's arguing symbols don't have meaning in of themselves, and that meaning is derived between the space between symbols. So therefore, they're all sort of relational in the concept of meaning. And so Derrida builds upon Saussure's linguistics and then adds Martin Heidegger's phenomenology, which is essentially a critique of Western metaphysics and his focus on the fluid nature of being, which influenced Derrida's approach to questioning traditional philosophical concepts. So you can see this fluidity in the idea of categories and being mixed with meaning is now in the in-between space. It's not within symbols itself. And then, of course, Nietzsche's critique of truth, which he is skeptical about the existence of objective truth itself, which again is ironic because the people presenting this as if they're presenting an objective form of truth, undermining Christian faith. And so Saussure, Heidegger, and Nietzsche are really the core inspirations for Derrida, sort of combining this into a deconstructionist philosophy that is really in opposition to, at that time, structuralism and building linguistic structures and understanding cultural phenomenon and all this different stuff. And then underneath it, and then we'll probably discuss this more in part two, because they use a lot of Vervaeke and cognitive science of religion. And it's because deconstructionism, because it was kind of a linguistic movement, the way they rooted themselves in science is through psychoanalysis. And so Lacan, Freud, these are then inspirations for emphasizing the unconscious and sort of evolutionary understandings of why religion exists and why people are religious. And when we watch some of the more TikToks, probably in part two, we'll see that they always move to the sort of evolutionary understanding of why people believe certain things or why the Bible says this or that.
Yeah, it's often closely associated with postmodernism in a lot of ways, because postmodernism was all about deconstructing your grand narratives. And so there are no grand narratives. Even the Enlightenment was a grand narrative. The universalism of the Enlightenment, the Age of Reason, that had to be deconstructed as a mythology that was promoted and proposed by certain power structures. You can see how this is adjacent to Marxism. There is a very clear demarcation, though, between postmodernism and Marxism, and so this is an area where Jordan Peterson typically kind of gets things wrong, even though there is some overlap, so because many of the postmodernists did like elements of Marxism. Postmodernism, though, was utilized by the CIA actually to fight against Soviet realism and cosmism. So it's actually the CIA that went and met with Derrida and various deconstructionists to try to incorporate and utilize this form of liberalism. And it's a form of liberalism because it's radical in its deconstructing process, right? So that if, for example, if there's no objective meanings, if there's no universal narratives, then Sovietism, cosmism is not true. And so it's part of the arsenal of the Western liberal project, even though it's a deconstruction even of Western liberalism. So people get confused over this, and they don't understand sort of these differences. But I'm glad you mentioned semiotics. I had quite a few classes that dealt with semiotics and in undergrad and grad school. So this is an area I know decently well. I'm not an expert in it, but you can begin to see why semiotics, which is philosophy of signs and symbols, comes to play a key role, because if we get really deep into deconstructing symbols, and like you said, there's that linguistic turn in philosophy, it begins with Vico, and by the time it gets to modern philosophy, you've got Wittgenstein and guys like this are basically saying that really words are just language games. They're not really conveying meaning. It's an illusion if we think we're deriving the author's meaning. And so it's a breaking down of first books and literature. You can see the same thing mirrored, for example, in the higher critical studies of breaking down the Bible in the German higher criticism schools after Luther. The same thing's going on in philosophy. If I can't know the Bible, if the Bible's deconstructed, a generation or two after Luther, then it seems to follow, well, wait a minute, I don't really know any book, do I? I can't, there's no book that I can actually derive. So I'm just importing all of my personal presuppositions and meanings into the book. So that's kind of the setting for this. But as David pointed out, most of the people I think involved in this don't know anything about all that.
They don't. Yeah. And academically, it's in the 1960s and 70s. It kind of grows prominence as a methodology within the academy, but it's really relegated towards literary studies and like cultural criticism. But once we get into the later 1970s and especially the 1980s, we see deconstructionism now turning towards biblical scholarship, more philosophical analysis, and really it's the 1980s that it became a very dominant. And this is why even today within the humanities, Michel Foucault is the most cited scholar in the world. And of course, he died from activities at bathhouses in the Bay Area. But I just wanted to point out that this isn't a new phenomenon, even though these TikTokers are acting like they just discovered the sun or something. This is kind of old hat stuff, and they really don't even know what they're engaging in, especially with their veridical claims about what scripture says or what. It's funny because even the Dan McClellan guy, he will argue for what he believes the intent of the author is, even though his own deconstructionist movement rejects, like you said, authorial intent within textual scripture or criticism itself.
Yeah, I want to make one little sort of a caveat here, which is that if you're into presuppositional argumentation and logic, believe it or not, there's actually an interesting role for postmodern people. I don't mean to say, obviously, that I accept or I want to promote postmodernism. Much like David Hume is very useful to us to show the logical consistency of skepticism and atheism and empiricism, or radical empiricism. In the very same way, we can actually take some of the critiques that postmodernists have, and they're very useful and they're very adjacent to transcendental argumentation. Just the critiques, though, so be very clear with what I'm saying here. I'm not saying that I want to adopt postmodern philosophy. There is no answer. I mean, the whole point is everything is destroyed and deconstructed because there are no grand narratives. So now, obviously, if we believe in Christianity, that's our grand narrative. But the postmodernists have a very good insight when it comes to deconstructing language from an atheist empiricist perspective. So anytime you're talking to, say, a normie Reddit level atheist who doesn't know this stuff, kind of the Dawkins, Dennett, Hitchens sphere, those kinds of people, they will not have any significant answer to postmodern critiques of their Enlightenment assumptions. So that's why they're very useful to us if you're very careful. So exactly, as somebody said in the chat there, Moray says, you can deconstruct deconstructionism. Absolutely. But they have very valid critiques of the presuppositions of the Enlightenment. In other words, I could use, say, some of the postmodern critiques against somebody like James Lindsay, right? Dr. James Lindsay would not be able to, I'm not saying that the postmodernists are correct in their answers, but their critiques can be valid critiques of Enlightenment assumptions, and that will, I don't want to yap too long, but that will get into the very interesting questions that are raised when we get into linguistic philosophy. And so for those of you that, one last point here, for those of you that have seen me, for example, in a lot of debates with atheists, you'll see me at times bringing up linguistic issues. That's because I had enough of a instruction in semiotics in my classes to know that most atheists aren't aware of how nuanced and complex language is, and how nuanced and complex the philosophy of signs and symbols is. And so if you know that stuff, it can be very powerful ammo against sort of the normie atheists.
Right. And I just wanted to rebut your point, is that that's exactly why you're utilizing deconstructionism or postmodernism is the scholastic approach, and I don't mean scholasticism, I mean like academic approach, is that these are tools. We're not supporting postmodernism or deconstructionism, but as you said, when really all this stuff is coming out of post-enlightenment and really post-Kantian critiques of rationalism, you can utilize these things as ammo from a theistic orthodox perspective and undermine people that are your perceived intellectual rivals. And that's why this stuff is useful for us, even though we would reject, again, postmodernism or deconstructionism as a ultimate methodology or endpoint for philosophy.
Yeah, and there's actually some really good philosophical books from this school. Roland Barthes actually has some really, he was a Skittles person. I'm not backing him up, but he actually has some interesting semiotic essays that I did, I think, in undergrad that we had to read. Elements of Semiology. I've read a lot of Umberto Eco over the years. He's actually not just a famous author and kind of weirdo anti-Catholic, but he left Catholicism and Thomism actually because of postmodernism and his atheism, and became like a committed, super duper, like hardcore, postmodernist. And his novels are actually really interesting critiques of a lot of, say, Roman Catholic metaphysical assumptions and things that we would agree with without accepting the end result. Because he's a totally kind of wicked dude, kind of like Foucault, right? Was totally wicked dude, but there are some really fascinating people, and I had to read Charles Sanders Peirce for this domain, as well as Saussure that you're talking about back in the day.
Peirce and William James, kind of the founders of pragmatism.
So I'll read a little bit more of this, and then we'll see what sticks out to you. It's interesting that it's that is popping up in evangelicalism. I'm wondering why that is, because is it just that evangelicalism is late to the game because, within mainline Protestantism or Catholicism, you had this deconstructing going on, maybe even after Luther with higher criticism. Why is this? I wonder why this is hitting Christianity right now. It says, after preaching a sermon in which he equated deconstructionism with leaving the faith, Matt Chandler clarified that it doesn't mean necessarily doubting or theological wrestling through church hurt. John Cooper stated, I don't even know who these people are, these are like famous evangelicals, it is time that we declare war against this deconstruction movement. It is anti-Christian. It is a false religion. On the other hand, other evangelicals like Tyler Huckabee argue that it can result in deconversion out of Christianity, and most often that it leads you into something somewhere in between to a form of progressivist Christianity. So I think from the vantage point of maybe the power elite, why this would be pushed so hard in these circles is maybe if they can't even necessarily get people to be full-on atheists, it at least gets the evangelical world to be more progressive and more cucked. And this is something that you and I were talking about beforehand. Right. There's an interesting pattern, which we'll cover when we get to your channel, with a lot of the guys involved in this. What are some of the patterns? And I think with the women, too. What's some of the patterns you've noticed with the people?
Well, I was just going through some of the TikToks of some of the more prominent deconstructionists of Christianity. And like you showed on your phone, like Dan McClellan, his entire Instagram, if you look, and they're all deconstructing Christianity, but they begin by him holding up T-shirts of X-Men characters, Superman, Marvel superheroes. And then there's another, a woman actually, and she has a TikTok called No Nonsense Spirituality. I mean, this woman is not an intellectual. Her videos, some of them have millions of views. And in her office where she sits there and films these, if it's not in her car, she has Funko Pops all over the background. And I thought that is ironic.
It never fails. These are the religious iconography of the soy world, aren't they? I mean, whether it's a Marvel universe or whether it's, Funko Pops, these are the signs and these are the semiotic indicators of soyness, are they not?
Yeah. And it's funny, because you're talking about like evangelical Christianity, and it seems like for them, they think that they're so much more rational. And I even watched a quote unquote pastor who's promoting this deconstructing my Christianity, and he's saying how wonderful this is. And he said that this was a movement that began in the 90s, no understanding of the history of philosophy or anything like that. But you could tell. So he was super pro LGBTQ, pro everything progressive. And it's a way for them to have a foothold in quote unquote Christianity, but rationalizing this is the modern person's religion. This is something that's deconstructed. We're taking away all the fictitious aspects of Christianity. And now we're coming to, for them, a fuller realization, a rational understanding of the biblical God, and how, all these criticisms of text and discrepancies, what they perceive to be between Old Testament prophecies and the Messiah and Christ, this type of stuff. But it really just seems a way for them to present themselves as intellectually sound and hyper rational. And I think that's why we're seeing it in like evangelical and Pentecostal charismatic circles. Is one, well, in the charismatic circle, it's kind of irrational, but
they're anti-intellectual movements. So yeah.
Right. But I've made the argument, because of the lack of sacraments in Protestantism, it really is an ideology. And so when you hear Protestants worry about the world, it's communism, it's undermining capitalism, it's ideologies that are in competition with Protestantism. This is why, if somebody's possessed, even I know somebody here in the local town, they went to a Catholic priest to get an exorcism because their Protestant church doesn't deal with that sort of material realm of mystery and the sort of super spiritual reality within the world. So I think Protestantism is already lean, because it's really an Enlightenment or early pre-Enlightenment creation. It is a hyper. It's ironic because they're anti-intellectual, as you said, but at the same time, it's an ideology itself. It's fundamentally about rational apprehension of beliefs.
Yeah, I think it's difficult to, in our society, be anti-intellectual when you are constantly hit with intellectual challenges. So what's happening is these evangelicals are then looking for intellectual answers and intellectual ways to grapple with intellectual challenges, and this is leading them to choose these kind of pseudo-intellectual answers and options. And this is, in many cases, I think, deconstructing and leading them out of Christianity. In fact, this one of the quotes here is by one of the persons who's a promoter of it. For example, they say you could look at Martin Luther himself as somebody who was a deconstructionist. He deconstructed his own Catholic upbringing to come to a new revolutionary paradigm, which didn't wholly abandon Christianity, but was something new and progressive. So Luther, even the proponents of it are saying, well, we're not doing anything different than what Martin Luther was doing, which I think is kind of true. And I think from an Orthodox perspective, I could say, yeah, the Pope too. Like the Pope in the 11th century of the Gregorian reforms was, as St. Justin Popovich says, another kind of, he was the first Protestant revolutionary, was the Pope at that time. Now, one thing that immediately pops into my mind too, from a philosophical perspective, is that the videos that I've watched and these pseudo-intellectual guys, and I remember this McClellan guy. People have sent me his videos before. I didn't realize he was a Mormon dude, but that makes sense because one thing you'll notice that people who say utilize a lot of these deconstruction elements and these postmodern ideas, that's a philosophy where there is no neutrality. There's no privileged position from which you can judge that's not theory-laden. Yet every one of the people who does these critiques in the evangelical or even Mormon world here, like they're assuming that they actually do have neutrality, because they're saying that, oh, the Bible has these systems of oppression. The Bible has these, bad arguments and has these falsehoods. Well, all of that relies on you having some kind of position from which you can make those critiques. But the problem is that if you're actually a postmodernist, there is no privileged position. There is no theory neutral position. So they're inconsistent in the application of this philosophy.
Well, and for McClellan, I was going through his YouTube channel. I think he has like 60-some thousand subs. And he introduces himself as that he's still part of the Church of the Latter-day Saints. And then AC sent one of his books that's sort of free domain, and I was reading it. And the reason why he's so adamant about sort of undermining the Christology or the Christophanies of the Old Testament in regards to Christ is because of his Mormonism. He wants him to take on a sort of Aryan Christology and promotion of his Mormon worldview. And so his deconstructionism and constantly undermining what we would consider foundational Christian beliefs is part for him to elevate his Mormon theology as being, in his view, more consistent with the Old Testament than, Orthodoxy or Catholicism or mainline Protestantism.
I mean, well, has he done a deconstruction of Mormonism? I mean,
no, no, I looked. I didn't find anything undermining Mormonism.
Well, I wonder how he would deal with the fact that, I don't know if you knew this, I just actually learned this a couple weeks ago from an ex-Mormon that called in. Have you seen the Joseph Smith translation of the Bible?
No.
So it's a real thing. So Joseph Smith added himself in 11 verses to the end of Genesis. So I'm serious. So just like more Muslims will say, John, the prophecies in John of the Holy Spirit, that's actually talking about Muhammad. It's obviously not talking about Muhammad. It's talking about the coming of the Holy Spirit. Well, Joseph Smith went one step further and actually added 11 verses to Genesis to predict himself in Genesis. So I'm curious what if Dan was going to do some linguistic constructions, right, and figure out if that's actually part of Genesis or not.
His whole thing's about breaking down the Hebrew to undermine Christianity, and I'd be curious to see the Hebrew of Joseph Smith in Genesis.
Exactly. Now that's a key point, because this is something not many people know. This is my own personal anecdotal observation. So in dealing with a lot of academics over the years and in a lot of circles, I've met a lot of people who focused on linguistics. And, there's obviously advantages to being a linguist. It's a great skill set, a great tool to have in your toolkit. But there's something that's a problem I've noticed with a lot of people who are linguists, which is that they oftentimes assume, I don't know if you remember the debate that I did with JF a long time ago, but JF kind of assumed that because he'd studied a lot of, neuroscience, that basically he knew everything else. Like, I don't have to know anything about logic or philosophy because I've studied, neurology. So I know what's going on. It's like, that doesn't mean that you're going to know anything in the domain of logic. You didn't know basic, logical fallacies. The exact same mistake, the sort of like boxed in, mono vision that they have is definitely the case with a lot of linguists. And so they will assume that because they've deconstructed language, that's all that you need to know. And then most of the time they're absolutely totally inept when it comes to philosophy. They have no idea what fallacies are. They have no idea the historical discussions and disputes of philosophy. They don't even know the history of linguistic philosophy. But they've studied linguistics, and they think, much like a physicist, right? You and I would know if we critiqued, somebody like, Dyer Dawkins or somebody, or Neil deGrasse Tyson, right? They think that, well, I've studied a lot of physics. That's the key to understanding and knowing everything. Well, that's your assumption. So that doesn't mean you know everything. In fact, you know very little of what's actually going on. And maybe Dan's a unique exception to the rule, but I mean, most of the time, linguistics people, they're so like one-sided, they have no idea what's going on.
Right. It's the Dunning-Kruger effect. And
yeah,
in regards to philosophy, like in his argument, so he has a whole book that's on the divine, Yahweh's divine images, a cognitive approach. And so he's mixing like cognitive science with his biblical criticism. And at the end of it, so he's making the case that the messenger of God in the Old Testament that Christianity associates with Christ, he's looking at certain words and highlighting that it's not taking on the full divinity of the Father, and therefore it's not. He's leading into the argument that Jesus Christ then isn't one with the Trinity himself, at least according to the Old Testament. And then he ends the book by claiming that Logos philosophy, theology, wasn't articulated till like the fourth century, and therefore wasn't even available for early Christians, and that this is a later innovation in Christian theology.
I mean, and again, that's rich coming from somebody who believes that Joseph Smith is a prophet who added 11 verses to Genesis to predict himself. But I mean, Logos, no, it's not. Logos theology is in John 1. The first generation of apologists are known as the Logos apologists. So this would be like Justin Martyr, this would be Tatian, this would be a lot of famous people right after the death of the apostles who are known for being Logos apologists. So that's just on its face preposterous.
Right. And that was my point with the Dunning-Kruger, is he's so focused on linguistics to make an argument that the philosophy wasn't developed till later to even express who the second person of the Trinity was. Therefore, that can't apply to the early Christian church before the Nicene Creed. It's like, what are you talking about?
Well, I did a whole live stream with Inspiring Philosophy a few months ago where we responded to Jake, the Muslim metaphysician, who makes this same argument, which, by the way, he just cribbed from a Jehovah's Witness website. I'm serious. No, they make this argument that there was no Trinity prior to Nicaea because, for example, they didn't have the philosophical concepts to do it. First of all, it's just simply false. Right. That they didn't have those philosophical terms there. You can see the terminology of even Trinitas and Tertullian and is it Ignatius? Not Ignatius.
Yeah.
Theophilus. Theophilus of Antioch also very early uses the term Trinity. So Triad and Trinitas are used prior to Nicaea. But even apart from the terminology and the philosophical toolkits, it doesn't matter because we don't believe that it's ultimately dependent on the philosophy terms. It's dependent upon what's revealed in those texts. And as you guys know, we've done multiple videos and streams where in fact, a few months ago, I did a 3-hour stream just in the Torah, just the references to the Triad in the Torah. And it took 3 hours to get through all of those, and I still missed one. So that's not even counting all of the minor prophets and the Psalms and so forth. So, and that's a whole other thing itself. We'll talk about more of that in the part 2 that we will do with COTEL. But again, I just wanted to stress this notion of the limitations of linguistics. And it's odd too because it's curious for me to hear somebody who's a postmodern influenced person to then think that they then have a key through linguistics. I mean, the whole point of this is deconstructing linguistics. So it's just it's just absurd.
And there's not inherent meaning in the Hebrew.
Yeah, right. Why would there be? Yeah, exactly. Why would there be inherent meaning in the Book of Mormon or in the Hebrew words? Right. Exactly.
And to your point, I wrote down at least a few references I can remember from my research that the Trinity is mentioned by pre-Nicene Christians: Ignatius of Antioch, Justin Martyr, Irenaeus, Tertullian, and even Origen. All of them speak of.
Oh, there's many more than that. In fact, in the Inspiring Philosophy, in the Inspiring Philosophy stream, we spent 2 hours going through pre-Nicene references. So what I was talking about earlier was just the words Trinitas or Triad. The word is used by Theophilus and Tertullian first, right, early on. Right. But the teaching that Father, Son, and Holy Spirit are all God, that's in almost all the church fathers.
Right. And because the focus on linguistics, they don't even address like historical tradition. So liturgy, prayers, hymnography.
That's a great point. Yeah, all of that's excluded. Rites, yeah.
All these things also represent the Trinity and divinity of Christ pre-Nicene Creed, but because that's not scriptural, then that's not even taken into account.
That's a great point. Yeah, they have a presupposition from their Protestant-ish derivations, and Mormonism is a Protestant derivation. They just assume that, well, we only go with the New Testament textual evidence or the written patristic evidence. But I mean, even the liturgies count as patristic and apostolic evidences. I mean, why would you not include them? But that's a great point. They just exclude this because of their assumptions of sola scriptura. And I think this is a great point to highlight, is that none of these people are ever self-aware of their own presuppositions. That's so key. Right. All right, now we have, let me read a little bit more. Sure. A lot of this, so what does it exactly mean to do this process? So we got the idea of where it comes from, its origins in postmodern philosophy and linguistics. This is just like stuff I found, just sort of normie stuff online. And this is important because, why are you going to normie stuff? Well, because this is what all the TikTok people are going to search and find. Right. This is where they're going to go. So the normie websites and everything said this involves, quote, first, you break down the components of your faith. So I believe in the Trinity. I believe in the deity of Christ. I believe in the salvation through Jesus and his blood and so forth. And then it says next you have to examine your beliefs in God. Why do you have those beliefs? Do you perhaps have presuppositions or biases? It's interesting that that terminology is coming up. Here's a key point. Do you have these beliefs because of your privilege? Wait a minute, privilege? So now they're bringing in like the critical race theory, CRT, right? The woke stuff is starting to, what would privilege have to do with my beliefs? But they don't even realize that they're caving to a separate paradigm already. So they think they're achieving neutrality, but they're adopting a leftist woke paradigm to begin to make these critiques. Do you see what I'm saying? Because there's like the articles will start to sneak in this idea that perhaps you believe in something because of your privileges, which is all like classical Marxist-ish speak.
Right. Well, and it ties in with Derrida because of his attack on logocentrism. So the centeredness of logos, he calls foul logocentrism.
Oh, because of male supremacy.
Yeah, that has to be undermined. And so deconstructionism typically always focuses on the margins, or what they call the areas of silence. So women in the Bible, non-Israelites, how does the God of the Old Testament deal with heretical views? These are ways in which they can then, what they perceive, undermine this presupposition of foul logocentrism for a sort of feminized, decentered, focused on the exterior margins of something, and attack the idea of a metaphysical continuity of logos, metaphysical categories themselves. So all this stuff is embedded within deconstructionism.
And you'll notice when you listen to the people that do this deconstructing process, when they start to state what they now believe and what they've come to realize, well, it just happens to be a bunch of woke stuff. In other words, they just happen to, no, I'm serious, they just happen to start saying, I realized Christianity was a tool for a system of oppression of underprivileged people and minorities. I realize, and a lot of them will say, the first thing they'll say is Skittle stuff. They'll say, I didn't realize that, like, there's nothing wrong with, like, being Skittles, and Christianity is the thing that told me that it's wrong to be this. Which is odd, because it's like, obviously Christianity told you, like, how is that some new revelation in your deconstructing process?
Right.
It says,
go
ahead.
One of the TikToks I watched was exactly that. It was a chick, I forget her name. I have it pulled up somewhere. Oh, Leaving the Faith. Her name is Leaving the Faith on TikTok.
Yeah, I've seen hers.
And her whole thing was exactly what you said is, well, I grew up non-denominational and I believed all these things. And then I went to graduate school and then I learned, and then we deconstructed the Bible. And I realized that it's part of patriarchal supremacy, and that really it's this Christianity is this hegemonic force that's oppressing us. And she was responding to a Christian who said that, basically was criticizing her continual criticisms of the church. And she was arguing, well, we have to, because this is how we liberate people, how we liberate women from again, this patriarchal dominating force. And it's exactly what you just said. And of course, it's a woman who goes to graduate school, and all of a sudden now she's enlightened about how you deconstruct Christianity and liberate.
Yeah, but I mean, she's just being brainwashed in the same woke grad school stuff of CRT and all the crap that everybody else who's been to grad school has been exposed to.
Right.
And so let's see, where was this? What was it? Okay. So then it says, next, after you wrestle with your privileges, you must release yourself from what you've begun to realize is not God himself. Deconstructing your faith can be a messy and complicated process, very similar to renovating a house. It can involve removing, adding, modifying, and rearranging the various structural elements that make up your belief and your lifestyle and your worldview to make it more livable. Thus, deconstructing your faith is not abandoning your faith wholesale, but rather looking for a more coherent and consistent way without inventing a new religion wholesale. So in other words, it's sort of like they're offering, like, look, you don't have to totally abandon Christianity. Just get rid of all the things that are, goes against the modern world, like being opposed to Skittles stuff, right? So that's all that it is, right? So yeah, call yourself a Christian, just scale it down to, not talking about Jesus being the only way to heaven. Kind of like Pope Francis the other day, right? All the religions are paths to God. Deconstructionism is a relatively new idea that originated in textual criticism. So this is, again, making my point. It's not just the deconstructionists and the postmodernist philosophers. It actually goes back to the post-Luther movements of higher textual criticism. Deconstructing these texts down to, well, we don't really know what Jesus taught, and we don't really know who the authors of these Gospels are. And so, if you remember, there used to be this thing called the Jesus Quest. And this was this, globalist promoted thing of scholars who are a bunch of Skittles people, shocker, right, who decided that we only know about 2 to 3% of what Jesus actually said. The rest of what's in the Gospels are these accretions of traditions. So where do we get this idea that there's these accretions of traditions? Well, it sounds a lot like the Protestants, doesn't it? Yeah. So in other words, it's the same idea of Protestantism. And you'll notice that a lot of the deconstructionists in the Christian world, they keep linking themselves to Luther. They're like, we're just the next phase of Luther's deconstructing and getting rid of the traditions of men and the accretions. How often do you hear evangelicals say, I don't follow traditions of men, I follow the Bible and Jesus' word, and you believe in the traditions of men and your idols and your icons. This is just the next level of that, by assuming that higher criticism can now be applied to every aspect of your own life. In other words, higher criticism was in academia, as COTEL said. This is doing deconstructing and higher criticism in your own personal walk in life to say, you don't know what these words mean. You don't know what the original Jesus was. Nobody knows what the original Jesus taught, if he even existed, right?
Right. Well, and Dan McClellan rejects a historical Christ.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go. I mean, does he say why? Is it like...
he just says that we have no historical evidence for his existence. And then he makes the caveat, we don't have the historical evidence for a lot of people that existed at the time. And therefore, the only thing we can base it on is references in the New Testament, basically. That was one of the videos I watched.
Okay, did Joseph Smith not... I thought Joseph Smith was a prophet from God. Did he not know this wisdom that McClellan has, that there's no evidence for Jesus Christ?
Good question.
If that's true, that would mean that Joseph Smith was a false prophet, because Joseph Smith didn't tell us that Jesus didn't exist. We don't have any evidence.
Well, Mormonism is the first world religion to join the World Transhumanist Association. And
I remember you saying that. I did not. Yeah, that was fascinating. Yeah.
Lincoln Canon is the head of the Mormon Transhumanist Association, the MTA, and he makes the argument that one doesn't have to be a Mormon to be a transhumanist, but to be a Mormon is to be a transhumanist, whether explicitly or implicitly. And they're part of this very liberalizing transhuman morphological freedom movement within Mormonism. And of course, Mormonism just condoned same-sex marriage. Was that like 3 or 4 years ago? So now it's okay within the Church of Latter-day Saints. So I suspect that Dan is part of the same, like, liberalizing all these Mormons that have academic degrees.
Yeah, and they're probably the Mormons that are now pro-Skittles.
Right.
We've seen that emerge in the last 20 or so years, where the Mormon Church has shifted away from their anti-Skittles stance, interestingly.
Yep.
Now, again, a lot of the articles that you'll see when you read about this, that pop up, they really like this house analogy. which is interesting because we kind of agree with that from a presuppositional, tag perspective. Like, yeah, you have these foundational beliefs, and then the rest of your beliefs are kind of built on those, presuppositions, those foundations that you have that make up your worldview. But what they'll always say in these articles and these explanations is to deconstruct is actually a process that can be different, but it is taking apart every idea, practice, tradition, and belief into smaller components. So you basically break everything down into these parts, and then you try to figure out, how do you know that little part is true? How do you know this little part's true? And so it's like an evil version of what we do when we presup people, right? Where we're actually getting them to question their presuppositions. The difference is that this is like atheist presup, where they're trying to like get people to become atheists, right? Because they say, oh, it's a painful process, but you may have to do this because you don't really know. And now here's another thing I wanted to come to, which is this is actually a fallacy. I've noticed in a lot of these people, when they describe their journey, they commit the genetic fallacy. They will think that when they deconstruct and they get to this point where it's like, well, I just realized, like, I got that from my mom. Like, my mom raised me with this. Well, first of all, that it came from your mom is just the origin of the belief. That has nothing to do with whether it's true or false.
Right.
But they'll oftentimes make this leap, which is the genetic fallacy, to say that, I mean, why should I believe something just because my mom said it? Well, that's true, and it's okay to ask that question. But also, it's not false just because your mom said it. In fact, the fact that your mom said it has nothing to do with whether it's true or false. And so there's a lot of genetic fallacy going on with a lot of these people.
Well, and I would say authoritative fallacy too, fallacy of authority, because Dan constantly refers that what he's presenting as the state of religious scholarship. Right?
So he's just
on behalf of the academy. So if you have problems with him, then you have problems with contemporary biblical scholarship. And one of the academic criticisms, I mean, because deconstructionism, there's plenty of critics also within the academy. And one of the points I wrote down that is fairly prominent is that it's overly deconstructive to the point that it's not constructive at all. As the point that you're making, it just breaks things down smaller and smaller and smaller. And so academic critics have highlighted that its primary focus of exposing contradictions and gaps and tensions within texts without providing any sort of constructive alternative response has led people to describe deconstructionism as nihilistic.
It's nihilistic,
offering little in terms of positive or meaningful engagement with any text, especially scriptural textual scholarship. So to your point, it's just constantly breaking things down into smaller and smaller bits. And of course, because it's ultimately relativistic, that's all you're left with.
Yeah. Why isn't McClellan, for example, deconstructing academia as a system of oppression and power, which is promoted what it's paid to promote? So I can turn the tables and use this very same argument, which I actually would do. And I would actually say that there's actually an agenda and a reason why the scholarship that you're appealing to in this fallacy of authority is promoted in academia. And that's because academia is corrupt. Which, by the way, he believes that academia in prior generations was corrupt because it promoted the patriarchal, phallocentric narratives. Oh, but now it's not corrupt, and we're supposed to just default to these people as if they're not corrupt anymore, when they're actually way more corrupt because they push the most ridiculous, even just totally degenerate stuff from academia. They're the spearhead. They're the tip of the spear of all of this revolution against, what is just common decency. Now, this article that I'm looking at here from the Sophia Society about deconstructing your faith, it actually goes on to describe, again, the breaking down of your paradigm, which is the stuff that we talk about. And it says that as you get older, you will realize that you encounter situations in life that don't fit with this paradigm. Now, that's actually true, I think, for evangelicals, right? Evangelicalism, as you said, is an anti-intellectual movement from the outset. And so it doesn't really equip people to handle really complex, nuanced situations. For example, evangelicalism can't tell you anything about geopolitics. They're usually totally ignorant about that. So when they're confronted with geopolitical issues like war, mass immigration, borders, they don't have any coherent answer to that because it's an anti-intellectual, ahistorical, scaled down, lowest common denominator position, oftentimes based on emotionalism I converted in a big tent revival because I was crying and the preacher made me feel bad, and so it's a pseudo Christianity that causes people to get angry and doesn't have any grounding or any coherent worldview, and that's why these people are so easily led out of this religion. Is that a pattern you've noticed?
Well, you mentioned the ahistorical dimension of evangelical Christianity, and I think when you're speaking, what kind of popped in my head is that's another connector with what deconstructionism is doing, because it's constantly trying to undermine tradition, because history itself is plagued with injustices and all these different things that they're trying to correct. So deconstructionism is, I mean, really part of these critical scholarship or Marxist theories about paving a new beginning point in history, right? So it has to undermine and flatten everything that came before it. And evangelical Christianity is sort of ahistorical, and so it's able to sort of bridge that gap even quicker because it doesn't have any long-standing tradition to uphold.
Keep in mind, tradition is a key area of war for these people. That's just showing that they're the next logical revolutionary extension of Protestantism. Protestantism was all about deconstructing the Catholicism of that day to get rid of the accretions of tradition of the papacy, some of which are actually legitimate criticisms, but from an Orthodox perspective, we would disagree with both. But again, keep in mind the idea here is, I got to get rid of the man-made traditions. Well, the assumption then is that, well, how do you know there's not man-made traditions in this book that men decided to put together? Oh, I guess there could be, couldn't there? So now I have to scale down all of those things, and even in my own life, wait a minute, how do I know I'm not believing in man-made traditions? You may be. So it's this scaling down process of lowest common denominator, which Protestantism was built on. Ecumenism is also built on the same idea, that it's not a holistic thing. Everything is piecemeal, broken down. It's all based on independent little data points that don't connect in any holistic, meaningful way. So there's a necessary anti-holistic perspective that undergirds all this as well.
And these deconstructionists are sort of ahistorical in the sense that they view themselves not within a historical context.
Yeah, they're in a privileged position, exactly.
Yeah, that's influencing their beliefs, their interpretations, their perceptions. And so they stand on this pedestal where they're able to criticize all of history and talk about the historical injustices and corrections that need to be made. Meanwhile, not
But we should be back. Yeah, so it was just something happened with... Sometimes collab cam doesn't work that great. Usually it works, but as you guys probably know, every now and then collab cam will kind of crash, and then I think it just crashed OBS. But okay, so we're back. I forget where we were, but do you remember what we're talking about?
The last point I was making was the ahistorical context of evangelical Christianity and deconstructionism, and how people like Dan kind of view themselves
historically situated. That's right.
Yeah, do not view themselves historically situated, and therefore which transhumanism also argues is that we're moving to the point where the post-humanity is a person who's no longer within the historical context itself, and therefore is no longer constrained by these historical contexts, because we're going to move into utopia. So I was just making that point about deconstructionism and evangelical Christianity sharing that ahistorical nature.
Well, that's perfect timing, because this article over here at Sophia Society about deconstructing, the next example they give is precisely about being historically situated. So I'll read this briefly and you can understand then what we're talking about. Let me give an example of deconstructing. A young child grows up in a loving home with doting kind parents that subconsciously believe that all people are good. Why would this child then have any reason or cause to believe otherwise? All he or she has ever known is the love, goodness, and warmth of their family. The second this child encounters or witnesses someone in the world who is therefore not kind, they begin to doubt this belief that all people are good. Thus, their worldview is shattered. How is a child to make sense of this encounter? Often they react by categorizing people then either as all good or all bad. And that works for a while until they've encountered someone who is that they previously thought was good doing something bad, or vice versa. Slowly then the paradigm must be rebuilt and shift to reflect the reality now that not everyone is good. Some people can do good and bad. Some people are largely good or largely bad. As you can see, without the ability to deconstruct something that was previously useful, in the case of the child. New information then comes in, which qualifies this simplistic black and white attitude. Thus, they no longer have a dualistic way of seeing the world, because it would only get them so far. Thus, this is true also for our faith. When we're young, we believe that whatever we were taught about God, earth, afterlife, and human nature is true. After a while, though, we usually have to develop and reflect upon new information, and thus we go into new stages of beliefs. People don't usually try to explain the doctrine of, for example, total depravity if you're a Calvinist, to a 4-year-old, but they tell them basic ideas about Adam and Eve and the fall, and thus, for example, a child is taught Calvinistic total depravity, and they're raised with this presupposition. Now, that's all well and good, and I would agree that that's a fine example, but none of that actually tells us, though, which beliefs are true or false. Again, because we're raised with something, we might actually be raised with a belief that's true, right? Right. So the deconstructing process is in part, can be, not necessarily, but can be built on fallacies. It can be built on illogical, non sequitur conclusions that we make just because we're raised with something. And they try to always say, the article goes on to say, deconstruction does not mean that your faith must die. It simply means that you have to update your faith and take into account new information. But whoever said that we didn't do that anyway? Like, where was, I mean, maybe within the realm of like fundamentalist evangelicalism, this is something that is true. But as you can see, they're taking something that we would agree with, that you do need to kind of question these presuppositions. Then they're saying, see, you need to become an atheistic liberal, is basically what it means. So it doesn't mean that you become a more coherent version of Christianity. They're simply saying, no, you got to be like an atheist or like a total progressive cucked Christianity.
Right. And that's, again, one of the leading criticisms by academics regarding deconstruction is that it's ultimately relativistic. And I have a point here that an academic made is they argue that by focusing on the endless play of language and meaning, deconstruction can suggest that all readings are inherently unstable, which can paralyze interpretation rather than aid it in any way. And that's exactly what we're getting at by building something on fallacious fallacies. You know, that stuff's really never brought into question within deconstructionism. It's just constantly undermining whatever they can through textual criticism.
Exactly. That's why you said ultimately it's nihilistic. Now, and if you doubt that, just as an example, at this Sophia Society where they're telling you, and there's like tons of articles about how you deconstruct, what it means to deconstruct, how do you relate to your family. Let me read you a couple of the other articles that help you after you begin to deconstruct. This is a necessary death. You don't have to be good. Recovering from evangelicalism. Jesus is queer. So I feel like maybe there's an agenda here. I don't know what you guys think. Do you see any patterns here? I don't know. But yeah. But what's weird, again, remember, this is the domain of evangelicalism, and I guess this Sophia Society is some sort of like hub of deconstructionism. Now, there's another article here that says, what does it mean to deconstruct? Well, here's your guide to doing it, and you're not going to be surprised as to what you will begin to see. Rethinking Christian sexuality, liberation theology, why it doesn't work to try to be pure in terms of sexuality, making sense of the Bible post-deconstruction, reframing your relationship with the Bible. So notice that it's all about the book. Right. Now, wait a minute, it gets better. Understanding the divine feminine. Wait a minute. What is patriarchy? Deconstructing patriarchy. God is our mother. Now, wait a minute. Why is the goddess Gaia narrative not a narrative that needs to be constructed, David?
Exactly. That's exactly it. Well, again, one of my third criticism of it is the subjective reader-centric interpretation. So as you're highlighting with all these article titles, they're taking the progressive narrative and then just reinserting that as a critical basis to undermine scripture. And so deconstruction has been criticized for privileging the reader's interpretation over the text itself and allowing personal biases and theoretical predispositions to dominate the reading process. And therefore, what exactly are we getting at here? It's really a intellectual militaristic attack.
Yeah, that's a good way. It's a weapon, because listen to the next couple articles here. Deconstructing Donald Trump. Reclaiming Christian politics for the DNC, of course. The politics of Jesus. Deconstructing Christian nationalism. So basically, it's just anything that is not total, like, you know, Democratic Party platform. It needs to be deconstructed, right? Black liberation, white evangelical racism, right? So again, it's like totally obvious just seeing the article titles that this whole thing is literally just a, like, I mean, they're probably getting money from like the DNC, Soros, you know what I mean? Like,
right.
Like BlackRock is like probably funded by all of that.
I believe it. Well, in regards to biblical criticism too, from what some of the academic critical analysis of deconstruction, I saw a few that argued that it's especially bad in biblical studies where they kind of stretch beyond the philosophical roots and even the context of what deconstruction was supposed to do, and kind of apply it indiscriminately across various disciplines. And so the rigorous philosophical foundation of deconstruction, grounded in Derrida's complex theories of language and metaphysics, is often simplified and then even misapplied in ways that lose total philosophical nuance, leading to these superficial, sort of misguided readings and interpretations.
Right. So Trump is a manifestation of the patriarchy, this kind of stuff, right?
Well, Dan actually made a video. I was going through his YouTube channel, and it's a vertical video. I think he filmed on his phone. People can find it if you put in his name. And the whole thing was about how Donald Trump and those who support him are part of a cult. And he used the imagery of idol worship and the golden calf of the Old Testament to demonstrate that that's what MAGA supporters are doing with Donald Trump. And therefore, if anybody is a cult and if anybody's idolatrous, it's Christians who support Donald Trump.
Yeah, but what makes the most sense is that Jesus was queer, and this was written by a TRANZ individual, shocker, who is pictured here all about BLM, shocker. Of course, not a black person, right?
Right.
But I mean, that's all I need to know there. But it's also, I wanted to mention this too. This is also connected to, again, this movement from a couple decades ago called the Emerging Church Movement, which was equated with the Emergent movement, a Christian movement in the late 20th century, early 21st century, so 90s and 2000s. Emerging churches are found all around the globe, particularly, though, in North America. And if I remember, this had some original origin source coming out of, like, ex-Episcopal Anglican people, so it's sus from the beginning. But this is kind of the seedbed from which now the deconstructing movement has grown. The idea is that people were tired of their traditional quote-unquote churches. So even Protestantism was getting bored with Baptist hymns and Episcopal hymns. And so they decided to start making house churches. So if you remember in the 90s, this popped off. And I know because I used to go to house church meetings in the 90s. I was immediately sort of swept up into this stupid house church movement because I thought, well, the New Testament says they met in households. That must mean low church house churches. I don't know if you've heard of this or if you're familiar with this, but the idea being that all of the religious imagery and vestments and incense or any of that kind of stuff are the trappings and the traditions of men. We got to get back down to this like simplified living. But what's interesting is that it's not just about that. It comes out of the home church movement. Because some of the people who were in the emergent church movement wanted to have liturgy. They wanted to have these elements. So there's no cohesive, like, actual doctrine or anything. It's just this sort of, like, hippie-ish Jesus idea of, like, man, like, Jesus was, like, you know, against the man or whatever. Do you remember the Jesus People movement?
Yeah.
You know that had a lot of CIA connections in terms of its origins.
I did not know that, but I'm not surprised.
And this is where you get the Vineyard movement, and this is where you get... what's it called? FDA used to be in this. He was raising this. I'm going blank.
Church Christ?
No, out of California, the denomination out of California that was birthed by these people. One of whom was actually in the CIA. No, I'm serious. Calvary Chapel.
Oh.
So the whole Calvary Chapel movement comes out of the Jesus People movement in the 60s and 70s, who were these hippies that converted to Jesus. A lot of them read Late Great Planet Earth by Hal Lindsey later on in the 80s. And so a lot of this like evangelical end time stuff was influencing these these hippies to convert to this weird evangelical Christianity. That unfortunately spawned a bunch of charismatic movements, the Vineyard movement and the Calvary Chapel movement. And I'm going blank on the guy who was the Calvary Chapel CIA guy, but he's one of the main early founders. Saddleback also has these connections. I don't doubt that.
Chuck Smith?
That's it. Chuck Smith. And there's even deeper connections too, because some of the guys were like actual Green Beret CIA operatives in Vietnam. Now, I'm not trying to be overly conspiratorial. Like they may just have been like low tier evangelical, Vietnam guys who thought like boomers that we gotta fight for America, so we're gonna start a Jesus church. We're gonna call it Calvary Chapel because we're gonna get back to the basics. You know what I mean? They might have had good motivations, but what you start to notice is that a lot of these people, like exactly Elon, like Rick Warren, why are they suddenly associated with Obama and the Council on Foreign Relations? Are you familiar with that?
Well, and Rick Warren has spoke kind of favorably about transhuman-like eschatology, and so he was actually I recently just read an article. It was on here it is, The Singularity and the Rapture: Transhumanist and Popular Christian Views of the Future, in which people like Hal Lindsey and Rick Warren are mentioned specifically about how they are constructing this sort of rapture eschatology, has very similar accoutrements to technological advance being part of God's divine plan that transhumanists kind of put forth. So I don't follow Rick Warren super close, but when you said that, it kind of popped out, because if he's associating with those types of groups and people like Obama, kind of makes sense then maybe why he's constructing an eschatology for his following that kind of mimics some.
Yes, that's a great point. I didn't actually know that, but I think people started noticing there was something obviously sus with Rick Warren when, if you remember back in the 2000s, when Purpose Driven Life got really popular and started selling like mega millions, it wasn't too long after that suddenly he was associated with Obama, and he flipped his position on Skittles' marriage. Did you know that? That was back. That was back in the 2000s.
Seems to kind of be his MO.
I'm trying to find. There's a great article that was written many years ago. It's really hard to find. It's kind of been memory hold, but there's it's about the Jesus people and the people in it that did have these sort of CIA connections. I'm looking through my old archived articles of stuff to see if I could by chance find it, but I don't know. It was on a Evangelical website of all places, and then that website got taken down, and then it got put at some other weird website. But yes, there is there is that connection there. Again, I'm not saying that's it. It was the Antipas article, exactly. Thank you. But I don't think that website exists anymore. So that's the problem, is that you can't really find that. No, Siri, go away. I don't want you. Go away.
Okay.
There you go. She went away.
Woman that listens.
Exactly, right? Maybe I'm 4 sex bots now. Ha ha ha. That's it. Let's see. Lonnie Frisbee might have also been one of those people who was like a Vietnam Black Ops guy or something crazy.
Peter in the chat said, wasn't it Rick Warren that gave the infamous speech at the World Economic Forum that they need to incorporate faith into their movement?
Who was it?
Peter in the chat said Rick Warren was the person that did that. Spoke at the WEF about how they need to incorporate faith, which is really, I mean, you've read it too, Homo Deus by Yuval Noah Harari. That's the whole thing about it, Dadaism constructing the new faith.
I haven't read it yet. I got it, but I haven't read it. Oh, by the way, I found the article. So I know this sounds crazy, but this article, which is actually pretty good, has been stored at a Rasta website. So of all places, this has been archived. It used to be at an evangelical website that was critiquing Calvary Chapel. So, but now it's at a website called the Dub Room. He said, "Come over here to the Dub Room, brother. This article is a racist." So there's the article, and it's by an evangelical woman who's not Rasta, but her name was Barbara Aho. And it goes into a long critique of the Jesus People movement and the odd characters and odd balls behind it. Particularly, let's see, the Antipas papers written by S.H.R. Shearer identify his intelligence assignments before and during the time of the Jesus People movement. From 1967 to 1972, he served as an intelligence officer in Europe. During Vietnam, the intelligence group, the 525th Division, and the 515th Counterintelligence Operative Group. In 1972, resigned commission to become a pastor for the Jesus People in Washington, D.C. This is, again, kind of the birthing of all this, these weird movements that we're talking about. Now, remember, this is the deep state connection to just this. This is the non-denominational movement's birth. It comes out of this stuff. You have to understand that. That's why I'm talking about this, because you're not going to be able to separate all of this emergent church stuff from the same funding, the same sources, the same origins. And that's why this is where you get the... Are you familiar with the Vineyard movement? The crazy charismatic stuff? Yeah. That's these people too. Council for National Policy, that's the fake right-wing version of the CFR. Anyway, so people can go read that there. We're not going to go down that rabbit hole, but yeah, that's another angle that you have to understand to this, which is that, so basically that movement of 60s Jesus People gives you Calvary Chapel, gives you Vineyard movement, gives you modern charismaticism, gives you the revivalist movements of the charismatic groups, gives you non-denominationalism. It all comes out of that, and that's all a bunch of like literal Pentagon deep state people. All right, we should be back. So
OBS is on one today.
I don't know what's going on. I've never had it be this fussy, but anyway, maybe we can try to get through some of this before. I know you're gonna have to go pretty soon, but we got a couple of super chats. I'll read some of those before this gets collapsed and nobody gets their super chats read. Storm the Cat, $10. I have a friend who's not a Christian, but unfortunately she's some kind of red pill person on certain things, and she's even noticed how utterly satanic modern punk rock music is. He said punk shows are full of skills, pride, and everybody has colored Baphomet statues everywhere. I'm not surprised. That sounds exactly like... I mean, the punk scene was always kind of like adjacent to a lot of that stuff, and so it's weird that what was supposed to be like, you know, the most rebellious music is the most establishment now.
Yep.
Anonymous sent $7. Thank you so much. Jeffrey Klein, $5. I saw a progressive post that was arguing that immigration law is against scripture, and they were using terrible theology. Yeah, I think most of the time they do. I mean, I've seen a lot of attempts by evangelicals to argue that we should have totally open borders. I think even Gavin Ortlund was arguing that, which I think is preposterous. I think even Peter Leithart was arguing that. But I mean, that's all just, I mean, to me, that's just fundamentally stupid. I mean, when has any Orthodox nation ever thought that you're supposed to have totally open borders? Just totally. This is what happens when you become a Protestant. You deny all tradition of the church, right?
Right.
Storm the Cat, $10. No, we already did that. Excuse me. AC since $20. Question mark. Well, thank you, AC. Appreciate that. This is not the only stream. We are going to do more streams over on COTEL's channel addressing the specific challenges that the deconstructionists all bring up. Ortho Debo, $3. Who are your favorite saints and why? This is off topic, I know, but just want some of the lore. Keep up the based work. Well, I like Saint Photius a lot. I like Saint Daniel from the Bible. I like Saint John, the theologian. I like the Cappadocians. I like Saint Athanasius. Who are some of your favorite saints?
Patron is Saint Patrick of Ireland. Saint George. And I'm a big fan of Cyprian of Antioch and Justina. Cyprian was like a great magician who was trying to cast a spell on this pious virgin, Justina. They backfired. He couldn't understand why it didn't work, and ended up giving up his faith and burned all his magical texts in the center of the city, and became eventually a bishop and converted so many pagans that there is no longer a magical tradition in his area.
Oh, wow. It's a great one. J-Mel, $40. I love you both. Thank you, men. Well, thank you, J-Mel. We love you, too. We appreciate that super chat. Storm the Cat, $5. How come they never deconstruct their deconstructionism? Exactly. That's exactly what our point is today. It's really philosophically nonsensical, but again, it appeals to a lot of people precisely because of evangelicalism is an anti-intellectual movement, kind of incipiently. And so people feel like they're getting some intellectual meat when they start to delve into this, kind of pseudo stuff. And it sounds cool, and they can make TikToks talking about how they deconstructed everything. And that's really what that Rhett guy does from Rhett and Link. Is it's super low tier. Like, it's just really, really guys, I know that you probably haven't seen a lot from me lately, but that's because I've been going through a process of deconstruction, and it's very, and they do a lot of emotional appeals. They're like, it's going to be tough, you guys, but we can do this together. And one of the things I had to realize is that, my views on Skittles people, it was totally coming from a place of privilege and oppression. I mean, that's literally how it goes. And then he goes on, Howie Mandel's podcast to talk about how he's, he's basically left his Christianity or whatever.
That's pretty sad. I have 4 points in which I try to deconstruct deconstructionism and highlight why it fails. So whether you want to do that now or before we wrap up the stream, I can go through those.
I'll go ahead and do it right now because let's get it out while we can before it collapses.
So I wrote down 4 points in which essentially deconstructionism fails at its ultimate goals. Number one, we've kind of already hinted at, but the failure to acknowledge a text specificity. So by treating text as primarily sites of linguistic play, deconstruction can fail to engage with specific religious, moral, and theological claims that biblical texts make. And this undermines the possibility of understanding the text as a coherent expression of faith and tradition. Because as you said, it's constantly breaking things down into smaller and smaller bits. And therefore, they never even approach a comprehensive understanding of a larger meta arc because they reject them.
Right.
And then number 2 is the reduction of personal and ideological biases, which we've already mentioned. But because deconstruction allows for multiple, often contradictory interpretations, it can enable individuals to reinterpret scripture in ways that align with their contemporary biases. This is particularly problematic in religious contexts where the text is intended to convey a specific teaching of truth rather than a canvas for endless reinterpretation. And then number 3 is undermining communal and traditional readings, is that deconstruction often dismisses interpretive traditions and communal understandings that have been built around biblical texts. This can be seen as a form of intellectual colonialism, to use their language, imposing modern individualistic interpretive frameworks onto ancient texts that were meant to be understood within a communal and traditional context. So that's
a great point that, by the way, applies not just to these people, but to every Protestant.
Right. I was trying to use their jargon, throw it right back at them. Intellectual colonialism.
Oh, that's great.
That was funny. And then the 4th one is inadequacy for theological engagement. For religious communities, the primary goal of engaging with scripture is theological understanding and spiritual growth. Deconstruction's focus on deconstruction meaning often does not align with these goals whatsoever, leading to a disconnect between deconstructive readings of the Bible and faith-based approaches to scripture. So
that's a great point. In fact, I might just retitle the stream "Deconstructing Deconstructionism." That's a perfect title. AC $10. Hengel, Boyarin, Hurtado, Bauckham, the same scholarship game that shows Hellenic philosophy was already in use with the exegesis of the Old Testament hundreds of years before Christ. Philosophy and Maccabees and wisdom text of the Old Testament. Yeah, I actually wrote an essay 10 years ago before I'd even read Hengel, Boyarin, or any of these people, Boyarin. Or any of the Jewish scholars talking about this, was about wisdom in the Old Testament, because I was arguing against EMJ. So EMJ has an incorrect idea that John the Apostle in John 1 is using logos in the same sense as Stoics and other Greek philosophers. Right. No, he's pulling from the Hebrew wisdom tradition of the personification of wisdom in the wisdom text. That's where John's getting that. It's not getting it from pagan philosophers. Now, pagan philosophers might be groping in the dark for that, but no, you already have, with the translation of the Hebrew text into Greek, the Septuagint, this tradition. So it's exactly right. Mindhack, $5. Thank you so much, Mindhack. Appreciate that. Storm the Cat, $10. Or we already read that one. Poo Poo McGee, $5. Can you do a video? Can you do a video where Gavin Orland talks about a fallible collection of fallible books? Or have you seen it and quickly explain why it's false? I mean, I've been responding to that for 10 years on videos. So, I mean, it's just, again, they just recycle the same argument. Just watch any debate that I've had with the Protestants where I talk about how If you say that the whole collection is fallible, then it really doesn't do any good if you say that the books themselves are infallible. Because if I can start removing them, and that's exactly what Luther and higher critical scholarship did, the end result is where we are today with today's deconstructionism. Do you not see that, like, this sets the precedent that there's no normative authority in history in the church to say, okay, here's the canon, this is it, it's set, it's established. Now every individual Protestant can do his own personal research to figure out what he thinks the canon is. And since there's no living historical authority from the time of the apostles till now, that's all Protestants are united on this. No one can bind anybody else's conscience in Protestantism. That's the Protestant basics, right? No freedom of conscience, freedom of worship, freedom of private interpretation. Since nobody can excommunicate anybody, nobody can say anybody's wrong, you end up with this position of anybody can say, well, I prayed and studied a lot, and here's my New Testament canon. And who are you to say I'm wrong? You can't bind my conscience. That's what, Protestantism is built on. So it's all absurd from the outset. And I've done probably 100 videos where I talk about a fallible collection of infallible books. But okay, so I know you've got to go pretty soon. Is there anything else in this introductory stream? And again, next week we're going to do some more in-depth responses to the actual arguments that these people use. Right. What else comes to mind? Any other things that we didn't hit on in this?
Well, in regards to deconstructing deconstructionism, I'll just reiterate. We've already mentioned them, but I had them listed. Regards to like the 6 main points in regards to even why academics criticize deconstruction, and I'm not going to reiterate why. We've already mentioned them, but again, the reaffirmation of authorial intent in historical context, the focus on canonical context and tradition, defense of coherent meaning. Again, the idea that these deconstructionists, they can't defend a coherent meaning because they reject any sort of overarching narrative that connects through history. And then their rejection of the role of tradition and community, and then their constructive theological engagement. Scholars like Stanley Hauerwas advocate for a constructive approach to scripture, which is obviously in opposition to the entire agenda of deconstructionism. And therefore, they really, as we highlighted earlier, scholars have pointed out that because it's constantly deconstructing, it really doesn't even give you anything to build upon. It's just constantly taking things apart. And then the last one, and really the most really devastating, even though they don't like to deal with it, is relativism. That many scholars refuse to use deconstructionism because ultimately it's inherently relativistic. And that connects back with the early part of the stream where Derrida is appealing to Nietzsche's rejection of objective truth. Therefore, like Foucault, everything is power structures regarding to the privileging of certain truths and knowledge. And therefore, you have to undermine all sources of power, which get back to the article you're reading with all those titles about BLM and queer Jesus and all this different stuff. What they're doing is focusing on the marginal. Again, the phallogocentrism, which Derrida wants to destroy and undermine, is the privileging of the masculine role in society, a logos, theological, metaphysical understanding, and the focusing on the centeredness of concepts and meaning. They want to reject all that stuff. And so ultimately what you're left with is relativism. And so as much as we watch Dan McClellan or all these other people that run a deconstructing Christianity, the ones that want to appeal to these academics is ironic because those same academics reject objective truth itself. It's all just power struggle.
Yeah, that's a great point that helps you understand where leftism and liberalism is today. It is essentially capitulated into nothing to do with what you would think of like, traditional progressivism in America with the fight for like, EBT cards and a great society and all that LBJ era progressivism stuff. Nowadays, liberalism and leftism is 100% totally about, which is odd, Nietzschean power struggle. It's completely capitulated to literally everything being about power dynamics, which that's a key to understand because that's how you understand that they don't care when you're arguing with them about what's true or false. Every argument, every debate, every engagement is pure power dynamics. And so it's all about the display, the spectacle, and the dominance. And that is the key to all of it. So remember, you're not engaging with people that believe or even care about what's true and false. They don't care about you exposing their lies because they see all engagements as pure power dynamics, which is odd because it's Nietzschean, which you wouldn't think the left would be in that mode of thinking, but that's exactly where they are.
Right. So it's all rhetoric and it's all sophistry. And that's why utilizing things like social justice and all the modern lingo, the reason why that's powerful for them is because they believe they're garnering a higher ground, a moral higher ground.
They're getting power from it. Yeah.
Yeah. They're gaining power from perceived contemporary biases that they are elevated over you, and that you then are forced, you're on the back heel defending the patriarchy, defending ancient traditions, defending miracles or this type of stuff. And they view this as, again, a way to undermine your source of tradition and identity and religious beliefs, but at the same time elevating them as modern contemporary people that are more rational and more up to date.
But at the same time, there is no basis for reasoning. There is no basis for logic.
Right.
There is no basis. It's all oppressive, except when they use it, then it's not oppressive, except that also it is oppressive because everything is just power oppressor dynamics. So, this is why these people are insane. They lose their mind. They're at war with reality, with logic, with reason, and with God. So that's why these people act the way that they do. That's why they have these meltdowns. They have these. They're essentially demonic. Alex was playing a clip of today. One of these when you go out to the abortion marches, when people are marching against abortion, and we have the pro-abortion people show up, and then the pro PEDO people and the TRA and Z people. They actually sometimes manifest demonic traits, like they're possessed.
Yeah.
And Alex is playing a clip of that today. So that's what's really going on. It's actually a spiritual battle. It's not all intellectual. I want to remind you guys to head on over to chalk.com. That is the show sponsor, choq.com. The link is in the show description. Those are great products for getting fit, for getting healthy, for upping your testosterone. A lot of guys are low T. Pretty much all the dudes that are into deconstructing are low T. I'm serious. We watched a bunch of these videos. The guys are Skittles. The guys are deconstructing their Christian oppression. The girls are actually more high T than the dudes that deconstruct. Anyway, so we're going to be talking about this again next week with my good buddy COTEL. Again, use the promo code J40 to get 40% off all those products. JAY40. JAY40 to get 40% off, JAY44LIFE, JAY44LIFE to get 44% off all the great products over at chalk.com. Link is in the show description. Also, COTEL and I are going to be doing a stream on, eventually, we'll figure out when we're going to do this, but a separate stream not related to this stuff, on the history of intelligence operations, British intelligence in particular, and Muslim Brotherhood, radical Islam, and the West. A lot of people don't know about this. This is another key insight and angle that's very relevant, especially as the internet puts a lot of focus on Islam in the last few years. The Tates, Hijab, Daniel Hikikachu, all these promoters of Islam in the West, all over the internet and YouTube, they're really calling attention to Islam. And so it's very crucial that we address Islam, not just from the theological perspective, which is the most important, but also understanding the Western linkages to Islam and its various forms. And that's an area I have read quite a bit. In fact, I knew more about that than I did before I'd actually read any of the Islamic texts themselves, or the theological traditions of Islam, which have been forced into in the last few years. Which is it? I mean, it's just so ridiculous. It's like the most ridiculous cult, man. But you know what? Actually, that's important because it's a very useful cult for getting people to act in these radical ways. And so if you're an intelligence agency, this is a ready-made, perfect lab from which you can pull lunatics to do all kinds of crazy stuff. In fact, Miles Copeland actually says that in his Game of Nations book. He says, CIA, we love these people in Egypt because we could get them to do if we needed a ready-made TERROR event, we could just use them right away.
Right.
Anyway, so we're looking forward. What made you? What gave you the idea to do that, or what hipped you to this whole issue of Islam in the West geopolitically?
Well, you covered it, and as I mentioned before, you did a 4th hour on Lord Voldemort's program.
That's right. I forgot
you said that. I thought it was great. It was so succinct. It was just point by point by point, and it's something that I've never covered on my channel, and it's not something that I've dove into much. So I'm excited to cover it with you because I know you have been covering it for a while. And if you have any specific articles or anything to read in preparation, I'd love to kind of grab a hold of that because it's becoming very obvious about the Red-Green Alliance, how global communism, if you want to call that, globalism, the centralization of power is utilizing the dialectic of Islam in the West. And it's with anybody who has eyes open to see, it's quite clear that that's happening. So you've covered that, and I mentioned that to you, and then the fact that I was kind of looking for new stream topics, and somebody brought that up. So I'd love to cover
one
that.
article I would recommend to everybody that's very insightful, that was actually pulled down from a very prominent, formerly, I don't know if this website's still up, but there used to be a pretty well-known kind of left-oriented critical of the CIA website. But it's very useful, though, because it had a lot of great articles. They're called Counterpunch. So Counterpunch was very useful for many years. They used to have a lot of great pieces up critiquing Brzezinski and people like that, the neocons. I don't agree, obviously, with every take that Counterpunch had. I don't know if it's still around, but there was a great article that was up that was pulled because it was so controversial. You can still find it, though, on academia.edu, and it's called Shills, Spooks, and Sufis, the case of the Mariamia. Here's the article here. It's not very long, but I do recommend people go take a look at that, because it's just one article that's an insight, a window into particularly the usage of Sufis by Western intelligence. There's obviously a lot more. Muslim Brotherhood has a much longer attachment to British intelligence than Sufis per se, but that's one window into this stuff. Yeah, it's a good article.
I just found it. Yeah, I'm downloading that PDF. I'll read that. Awesome. Yeah, so we'll figure that out. Maybe in like 2 or 3 weeks, we'll set a date for that. But next week, we'll do a part 2 regarding some of these TikTok deconstructionists. And so we'll address a lot of the religious contentions. And again, they pull, from what I found, they reference a lot of sort of rabbinic interpretation of Old Testament text to reject the messianic prophecies of Christ. They tend to reject the existence of the Holy Trinity as being scripturally justified. And then they pull from these, and they're
like Reddit level. Is it like Reddit level stuff about God's mean and stuff?
Yeah, that's basically it. And I wrote down 4 that I found multiple times, and that's the Great Flood, the bears attacking the youth, and 4 kingdoms or 2 Kings, depending on what Bible you have. The Canaanites punishing Israel, and then Israel destroying the Canaanites. Those 4 instances, I found multiple people on TikTok referencing as, oh, the old T God he's mean and nasty and vengeful, and a lot of them then take like a sort of Marcionite approach to scripture.
And I'm able to, we can address those very easily. So
yeah.
Looking forward to that. Hey, thank you so much, man. Everybody in the chat, we got up to 1,000 today. Glad to hear it. Be sure and follow. We mentioned Rob Bell earlier there, Cindy. We should actually do maybe more of a deep dive on people like Rob Bell and the Emergent Church founders. But be sure and follow Church of the Eternal Logos, David Patrick Harry, over at his channel. I've got him linked. And anything else you want to promote before we call it a close?
No, just go check out my YouTube channel, churchoftheeternallogos.com. It's hyperlinked in the title here. Click that. It'll take you over there. Give me a sub and check out Jay and I. We've done multiple streams. Each one is a totally different topic. We've done circularity in philosophy, deconstructing the Vatican and the evils of the Pope, the papacy. We have one on Protestantism that has been shared a lot of times. It's one of my more watched videos. So looking forward to whenever we can get together. It's always great content.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And guys, I want to remind you too, I will be over at the comedy event. It's a 2-day comedy event. They still haven't, people could be asking me, what day are you there? They haven't done the lineup yet, so I don't know exactly which day it is, but it's Bohemian Grove. And so Elijah Schaefer's going to be there. Maybe Shane Cashman will be there. We had a great chat the other day over on his podcast from Timcast. Who else is going to? Leonardo Joni, the comedian, she's going to be there.
Nice.
A lot of people are going to be there. They're trying to, I think, secure more and more people to come for sure.
Is that in Florida?
It is. It's in Florida. It's October 25th and 26th. And so here is the link to that for those that are interested. I'm going to be doing, I'll be going on the different podcasts, and people want to come and talk to me, they can. But I'm not going to be doing a talk on anything serious. It's going to be just totally, from my vantage point, fun. I'm going to be doing some karaoke. I'm going to be performing Cringecore live. So it's going to be a fun. It's more of a comedy event for me, but I will have books and I will have be doing interviews and so forth. So if you want to come get signed books, you can, and that will be October 25th and 26th in Summerfield, Florida. Anyway, the link is there. Thank you very much, COTEL.